Welcome to Dateline 360. Today we explore the issue of planning against flooding in Nigeria. In 2022, the country experienced devastating flooding that resulted in the loss of lives, property and infrastructure. This humanitarian crisis affected over 1 million people and was a wake-up call for the country to be better prepared for future incidents. On this edition, we will be taking a closer look at some of the states most impacted by the 2022 floods and the steps they are taking to prevent similar occurrences. Our environment correspondent, Onengiye Fineface, provides us experts' insight on building resilience against flood disaster in 2023.
Memories of flood devastation in Nigeria remain fresh in many minds. The story of Wadiolos will not be forgotten in a hurry. It is a story of elderly citizens trapped in their ramshackle home in the heart of the flood in Akilogidi, a community in Ogbaru local government area of Anambra State. Akilogidi is only one of many communities in Nigeria exposed to the impacts of flood every year. In 2022, Nigeria witnessed the worst flooding which affected nearly all 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, damaging property, built infrastructure, roads, farmlands and livestock. Data from the Federal Ministry of Water Resources indicates that more than 1.4 million people were affected, including more than 600 deaths and thousands of displacements. The World Bank estimates that Nigeria suffered $6.68 billion economic loss as a result of the 2022 flood.
This year, 2023, there are fears that what happened last year might in fact happen again. And going by what's trending in the news, it's already happening in some parts of the country, like the Federal Capital Territory. The Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency had predicted placing some states on high alerts, especially those that are contiguous to rivers Benue and Niger.
NESA, in its flood outlook for 2023, places 178 LGAs in 32 states and the FCT within the high flood risk areas, 224 LGAs in 35 states within the moderate flood risk areas, and 372 LGAs in low flood risk areas. The federal government also inaugurated the Presidential Committee for the Development of an Action Plan for Preventing Flood Disaster in Nigeria on 3rd November 2022. This committee and the early warning contained in the 2023 Annual Flood Outlook seems not to have prevented flood disasters this year.
There must be concerted effort to deal with it, because it is affecting the economy, it is affecting agriculture, and it is affecting food security. And for the fact that the country is not doing so well economically now, we cannot afford any leakage.
The rains are here already. Flood disasters are being recorded across the country. But Clement Nze, Director General of the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency, believes that it is not too late to manage the situation to minimize the losses.
Prepare for evacuation of people. Work as though something is going to happen. Clean or clear your drainages. Let the people be enlightened enough. And nothing stockpile. The people should not be looking up to NEMA all the time. It is when the local emergency management committees, that's at local levels, local government levels, are overwhelmed. The states come in.
While agencies of government are expected to up their game in responding to flood situations, citizens are also expected to take action and do so in good time, so that when the floods hit, the impact will be minimal. Most of all, people are expected to evacuate their communities if those communities are contiguous to the major rivers. Onengiye Fine Face for Dateline 360.
In 2022, more than 800,000 hectares of farmlands amounting to more than 120 billion naira were reportedly washed away by floods. An agrarian state, farmers in Niger State were among those affected by the 2022 floods. Fatima Usman reports that some of them are already counting losses due to unfamiliar rainfall pattern that have beaten their strategy of avoiding floods on their farmlands. She also reports on some mitigating measures being adopted by stakeholders to overcome the perennial problem.
Niger State ranks among the top states in the country with fertile land for the growth of most stable crops in Nigeria. Rice, the most consumed grain in the country and arguably world over, is one of the most cultivated in the state. Year in, year out, the farmers keep counting losses in the process of cultivating the crop, owing to the fact that it flourishes the most on waterlogged areas, thus its vulnerability to flooding.
They are not balanced with the issue of this flood. It has unbalanced us in anything we want to do as regards to farming.
Even when we started, we went to borrow money to make sure that we get something started for ourselves. But we discovered that at the end of the day, flood came and everything was washed away.
Those were farmers' woes during the 2022 farming season, hence the advice by experts on measures to forestall reoccurrence in 2023.
Our revived technology of Faro 67 and Faro 66. These varieties are flood tolerant, while other varieties will hardly survive flood, after 2 days. Faro 66 and Faro 67 withstand flood for more than 2 weeks to 20 days. Strategy would be to study the period during which floods occur. Once the occurrence has been established, then you'll be able to know the pattern. You can predict with absolute certainty when the flood will come. So you either time your planting of rice and other rice activities such that the flooding incidence is evaded.
However, the strategy was of no gains to some farmers in Kacha headquarters of Kacha local government areas who are already counting losses to what they described as unusual climate condition in 2023.
This year it started earlier than that of last year. Now up to 3 times now that we are experiencing the floods.
The method adopted to prevent the flood is to start early, but even still I am affected by the flood.
The Niger State Emergency Management Agency, however, says it is ready for the season.
Over the years, we have developed a system where these riparian dwellers, that is people that live on the floodplains of these two trans-regional rivers, the Niger and Kaduna, we've provided alternative places for them. We call it the resettlement site. And we've also identified safe grounds for them, you understand, to move to when the flood comes.
What we have always advocated is that farmers can form cooperatives. Once they're able to form cooperatives, they can raise a fairly large fund, for construction of some of these facilities. Otherwise, government intervention, is still the way out.
Until then, rice farmers remain exposed to floods. In Mina, Fatima Usman, reporting for Dateline 360.
Moving on, Taraba State, which was impacted by the release of water from the Lagdo Dam, is also suffering from flooding. Ado Adamu also reports on the advocacy for a holistic approach to mitigate the predicted floods by NIMET.
Flooding has been a recurring phenomenon in Taraba State, devastating communities in different parts of the state year in, year out. In 2022, the state was among those affected by flood, where several communities in 7 local government areas, mostly along the Benue riverbanks, were washed away, including farmland and livestock. Each year, the release of excess water from the Lagdo Dam in the neighboring Cameroon Republic worsened situations for the state. It was a devastating year for most of the farmers who lost their investment completely to flooding.
We expected the government by now to have mobilized the various commodity associations, the farmers group, so that this signal can be read as a riot act to the farmers. But unfortunately, year in, year out, things keep happening.
If you look at it, we have it in different phases. We have the ones that is caused by urban due to blockage of the drainage. And then the larger part of it is the one from Lado Dam, those community living along the River Benue area. So they also suffer that aspect. One of the solution we are suggesting to government that the River Benue, there should be a dam that we control this amount of water as the Cameroon authority release their own water. Some part of this water can be trapped from those dams, and then the effect will be reduced.
With the Nigerian Meteorological Agency's NIMET prediction for 2023 forecast out, Taraba State is one among the states on the watch list. This has left farmers and communities along the River Benue, who are mostly the victims of the flood, worried of another devastating outcome if nothing is done by the authorities concerned.
We are even now trying by the state government and some assisted world bodies to come in to help by installing along the River Benue early warning system, so that once they had it, they will tell you that, okay, these white people, they have started warning us, let us begin to run.
One important thing to note here is this flooding is not only affecting communities around the plains of the Benue River that passes through Taraba State, covering about 6 to 7 local governments area, but you have urban centers also being affected as results of human activities that are resulting into blockage of waterways and other activities. So efforts must be geared together by stakeholders to mitigate these things as we face another projected flooding in 2023 by NIMET. In Jalingo, Ado Ademual, so reporting for Dateline 360.
Mohamed Musa Askira reports on the measures put in place by the Jigawa state government to address the yearly impact of floods, while also appealing for support from the federal government, international humanitarian organizations, and other groups.
No doubt, flood disaster remains a nightmare for residents of many parts of Jigawa State, including the government, which bears the burden of resettlements of displaced and provision of emergency relief for the victims, among other commitments. Last year's episode of flooding in Jigawa State was considered the worst of all flood incidences that hit the state in the past.
In 2022, over 400,000 hectares has been destroyed and completely submerged by water. This resulted to the high number of IDPs of over 65,000 displaced people in Jigawa State.
Statistics from the State Emergency Management Agency, SEMA, indicated over 300 lives were lost, including 22 bridges and culverts, as well as many state roads were destroyed by the flood and flood-related problems in the affected areas across the state.
We believe the flood at this year, with this recent global warming, it is beyond the capacity of the government of Jigawa State. There is need for a national and international intervention to support the government of Jigawa State in addressing this problem.
It shows that so many people will be saved this year, inshallah. So, and we will continue to do this to ensure that until and unless we save our people from this problem of flooding in Jigawa State.
Though the state government is still struggling to fashion out lasting solution to the problem of flood in Jigawa State, the temporary measures being put in place are expected to cushion the impacts of the flood in case it occurs in this 2023 rainy season. From Dutse, Muhammad Musa Askira for Dateline 360.
Now, looking at cause and effects of flooding across the country, environmentalists advocate for a flood risk management plan at the local government level for an effective bottom-to-top approach. Larry Bilei spoke with them to understand the importance of this approach.
Studies, guidelines, and warnings by environmental agencies and experts on flooding in Nigeria are abound. Yet, every year, at the peak of rainy season, some Nigerians in flood-prone areas face mind-blowing disasters as a result of flooding. Lives have been lost, property destroyed, and farmlands submerged, with economic and attendant health risk.
The months of June and July are perhaps the heaviest rainy months of the year. And definitely, whether we like it or not, the frequency of the rains, the intensity of the rain will be much higher than the previous month. When these rains come in large quantity, more than what our system can absorb, because of the way we have obliterated, because of the way we have reduced the natural means by which these rains used to be absorbed by the wetlands and the rivers themselves flowing straight into the sea, a lot of things will definitely happen.
Environmentalists believe government at all levels needs to do more, particularly in taking proactive steps to forestall effects of extreme weather events. Forecasts and warnings of relevant meteorological agencies, they advise, can assist in achieving this.
Now, I will say that agencies of government like NIMET and the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agencies, they have been doing a very, very good job with early warning systems. They've continued to improve year in, year out. And that's why we are talking about this, because they have raised the alarm that there's going to be flooding across the country. So the follow-up action at both federal and state level, that is where we have these problems. Because when the alert by NIMET and the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency is done, it is anticipated that there's immediate action. This is the response we are supposed to get. By now we anticipate that state governments will have been opening up the drains.
Challenges associated with flooding are aggravated by seemingly unpredictable climate crises affecting Nigeria and nations around the world. Environmental experts advocate for flood risk management plan at the local government level to monitor flood vulnerable areas. Strategic flood management is indeed important and demands effective monitoring and implementation of action plans that captures environmental peculiarities. In Lagos, Larry Bilei reporting for Dateline 360.
And Ojonogwa takes us to the confluence of rivers Niger and Benue, Lokoja, which is now synonymous with floods during the rainy season. She reports on the state's preparedness for any eventuality and the impact of flooding on people, livestock, property, and farmlands.
Situated in the north-central part of Nigeria, Kogi State, at the confluence of rivers Niger and Benue, bore the brunt of the 2022 flood disaster. 9 local government areas within the state were severely affected by the flooding. As a result, farmlands were destroyed, critical infrastructure was damaged, and inhabitants were forced to abandon their ancestral homes for safer areas. Unfortunately, many of these victims lack access to basic social amenities and a protected environment, leading to poor standard of living.
We suffered here last year. We didn't carry anything from farm.
Last flood, a house collapsed that year. And people died and some were injured.
What measures were then taken to mitigate the impact of the floods on citizens?
There's one we built in 2012. It was called the Flood Estate. And in that flood estate, we have hostels. So presently we are even trying to put that hostel back in shape so that we don't have to wait till it happens before we start relocating.
To address this impending risk, what steps have been taken to mitigate the causes of flooding in Kogi State?
as a state, ensuring that before that time we will have made provision, adequate provision for IDP camps to at least get victims in where we'll give them at least little succor.
Considering NIMET's prediction of possible flooding this year, it is crucial for those residing in flood-prone areas to move to higher grounds for safety, aiming to prevent a reoccurrence of tragic events witnessed in 2022. Ojonugwa Ata for Dateline 360.
And Aya Prezi takes us to Bayelsa State, where the 2022 flood wreaked havoc on public and private infrastructure. He reports on plans in place to prevent a reoccurrence.
The devastation caused by the 2022 flood in Bayelsa State was enormous and unprecedented, as the state sits below sea level and occupies the base of Nigeria, and therefore was at the receiving end of all the flood waters from the upper regions of the country. However, the impact of the 2022 flood was aggravated by apparent lack of emergency preparedness and management by relevant authorities of government. That accounted for the state of helplessness the people were thrown into when the flood descended upon the state in such fury and ferocity, destroying critical infrastructures like roads, denying people access in and out of the state. The rains are here again, yet not many seem to realize that the floodwaters are just around the corner. Blocked drains, long curtains of grasses and buildings standing on canals and other waterways are common sight in places visited by NJ News in Yenagoa, a city in dire need of strict enforcement of town planning regulations and laws by relevant authorities. Earlier this year, the state government had established flood and erosion control directorate to holistically examine the issues around the problem. However, environmental and economic experts think construction of dams in the upper regions of Nigeria and diking of towns and communities in Bayelsa are most appropriate measures to reduce the flooding challenge, which is perennial in the state, due largely to its low topography.
It's a very flat land, and we need to consult the right experts who will advise government or other developers to ensure that whether you are in or out of government, you do not block water channels. We should have special channels created purposely, consciously for water, just as we have the oil pipelines.
We must dredge this Epie Creek and the North, possibly down to the ocean.
I'm calling on state governments and the federal government to start immediately the construction of the proposed dams so that this perennial flooding every year could be avoided. At the same time, these dams will even improve the power generation in the country.
Meanwhile, officials of Bayelsa State Flood and Erosion Control Directorate were yet to be reached for interview as of the time of filing this report. In Yenagoa, Aya Prezi.
We must also prepare for the humanitarian needs that arise during natural disasters, including floods. Ilyasu Yakubu provides us with some preventive measures on ground for the year 2023.
The National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, has been working around the clock to bring a lasting solution to the effects of perennial flooding on Nigerians, especially those resident in the coastal areas. One of these strategies adopted for the 2023 strategic solution, NEMA says, is the adoption of the Sendai framework initiated by the United Nations in 2015, which squarely zeroes on total preventive measures to minimize the level of devastation in the aftermath of flooding. Director General, National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, Mustafa Habib Ahmed is confident that with the establishment of the local organizing committee on disaster risk reduction in all the states of the Federation to prevent disaster before it occurs, the 2023 flood devastation preventive strategy will be an effort to reckon with. This is in addition to the deployment of search and rescue equipment, water purification machines, ambulances, as well as activation of the search and rescue unit of the Nigerian military to assist in the lifting of food items to non-accessible areas and evacuation of trapped victims in the event of flooding.
We are actively working on DRR priorities, organizing platforms to evaluate the state of DRR and enhancing early warning systems.
Experts say, unless and until this strategy of preventing disaster before it occurs is embraced by all the nook and cranny of the country, the yearly rituals of flooding will continue to be a nightmare for the affected communities. For Dateline 360, Ilyasu Ali Yakubu.
Thank you for watching Dateline 360. If you live in floodplains or coastal areas, please move to safe grounds. I am Omotala Omojala. May God bless Nigeria.